Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture a specific moment in time. Imagine a guy living in the 14th century, right in the middle of North Africa. And I don't mean living like he's having a nice time. The world around him is, frankly, it's falling apart.
It's apocalyptic. I mean, for the people on the ground, it really would have felt that way. This wasn't just a bad decade. It felt like the end of an era.
Absolutely. We're talking about the Black Death just sweeping through, wiping out entire cities, killing friends, family, rulers. You have dynasties crumbling, sultans getting assassinated before they can even get comfortable on the throne. And in all this chaos, this literal collapse, this guy decides to sit down and write a history book.
But not just any history book. I mean, that's the key here. If he had just written another chronicle of events, we would not be talking about him today.
Exactly. He doesn't just list, King so-and-so killed King such and such. He writes a book that basically invents sociology, economics, demography, and political science, all before the Renaissance even really gets going in Europe. We are talking about an absolute giant of intellectual history, Ibn Khaldun, and his masterpiece, the Muqaddimah.
It is a staggering piece of work. And what's so fascinating is that the Muqaddimah literally just means the introduction.
Right.
It was only supposed to be the preface to his massive universal history, the Kitab al-Ibar. So he writes this huge multi-volume history of the world, but the introduction, the theory part, it becomes so profound, so analytically deep, that it just overshadowed the actual history book it was meant to introduce.
It's the ultimate case of the opening act being better than the headliner. It's like if you wrote a user manual for a toaster, but the intro explained the meaning of life so well that nobody even cared about the toaster anymore.
That's a surprisingly good analogy, actually.
Yeah.
The introduction became the main event because it gave you the tools to understand everything that followed.
So today, our mission is to do a deep dive into this introduction. We're going to look at this man who's often called the father of, well, pretty much everything in the social sciences. We need to figure out his new science of how humans organize. We've got to understand this concept of Asabiyyah, or group feeling, which is just a brilliant, brilliant idea.
It's the engine of his whole system.
And we're going to trace that inevitable kind of tragic cycle of dynasties, from the tough life in the desert to the luxurious palace, and finally to total ruin.
And it's a cycle that Ibn Khaldun argued was as inescapable as gravity. And to understand why he saw the world that way, you have to look at the world he was living in. This wasn't some scholar in an ivory tower. This was a man who was deeply, deeply embedded in the Game of Thrones of 14th century North Africa.
That's section one, the man in the moment. So let's set the scene. 14th century, Tunis, Fez, Granada. What is the vibe?
Chaos. Just complete chaos. Political fragmentation. You have the Hafsids in Tunis, the Marinids in Fez, the Nasrids over in Granada. But the real backdrop is decay. Ibn Khaldun was born in Tunis in 1332. He comes from a very elite family, the Banu Khaldun, who traced their lineage back to the first Arab conquerors of Spain. They were from Seville.
So they were basically refugees, in a way.
In a sense, yes.
Yeah.
They'd fled Seville right before it fell to the Christians in 1248, during the Reconquista. So you have to imagine, Ibn Khaldun grew up with this family narrative of a lost paradise, a lost civilization in Andalusia. He grew up hearing stories of the poetry, the high culture of Seville, and how it was all just swept away.
So that sense of loss is baked into his DNA from the start.
Completely. And it gives him this sense that civilization is fragile. And then when he was just a teenager, the Black Death hit.
Right. The plague.
It swept through Tunis in 1348 and 1349. It was catastrophic. It killed his father and his mother. He was 17 years old.
17. I mean, that's such a formative age. You're just becoming an adult, and boom, the two anchors of your life are gone, along with a huge chunk of your entire society.
It changed him forever. He writes about it in the Muqaddimah. He describes it as a moment where civilization decreased with the decrease of mankind. He even says, and this is a quote, "It was as if the voice of existence in the world had called out for oblivion and restriction, and the world had responded to its call."
Wow. The voice of existence called out for oblivion. That's dark. That is not the writing of some dry academic.
Okay.
It's someone who has stared right into the abyss.
It really is. And so this young, orphan, brilliant man living in a world that feels like it's ending, what does he do? He enters politics. And this is where that Game of Thrones analogy really works. He wasn't just observing history. He was in the thick of it.
He was a player.
A major player. He served the Hafsid rulers. Then he defects to the Marinids in Fez. He was a seal bearer, a secretary, a diplomat. He gets thrown in prison for almost 2 years by one sultan because of political intrigues. He was constantly switching sides.
He sounds like a bit of an opportunist. Or maybe just a survivor.
I think it's both. He was incredibly ambitious, but you have to understand, he was navigating a world where loyalty could get you killed. If you backed the wrong horse, your head ended up on a spike. So he moved. At one point, he ends up in Granada serving Muhammad V, and he actually meets King Pedro of Castile, Pedro the Cruel, on a diplomatic mission in Seville.
Wait, this is back in his ancestral home.
Exactly. He is standing in the city that his family fled. And Pedro is apparently so impressed by Ibn Khaldun's intellect and his skills that he offers to restore his family's ancestral lands in Seville if he'll switch sides and work for him.
The lands they lost, the paradise lost, that must have been an unbelievably tempting offer.
It's the dream of his ancestors. But Ibn Khaldun refuses. He eventually goes back to North Africa. But by the time he's in his mid-40s, he's just exhausted. He calls politics a morass. He's tired of the backstabbing, the shifting loyalties, the constant instability. He realizes all these petty kings are just reshuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic.
And he needs an escape. This is the turning point, right? The retreat.
This is everything. In 1375, he retreats to the Qalat ibn Salama. It's a castle, really more of a fortress, in what is now Algeria. He stays there for 4 years, under the protection of a local tribe. And it's there, in this total isolation, stripped of all the courtly intrigue, that he has this incredible burst of intellectual genius.
He writes the entire Muqaddimah in 5 months.
5 months. Just think about the magnitude of that. This is a text that scholars spend their entire lives studying, and he just poured it out in less than half a year. He describes the experience so vividly. He says, "I completed the introduction with words and ideas pouring into my head like cream into a churn until the finished product was ready."
Like cream into a churn. I love that. It's such a great image. It implies a process. It's not just a lightning strike of genius. It's that he had all this raw material, the milk from his whole life.
Right.
The plague, the politics, watching these kings rise and fall, the prison time. He just needed to sit still long enough to churn it all into butter, into a coherent theory.
And that theory was born from a specific frustration. When you look at how history was written before him, Ibn Khaldun was just incredibly critical. He basically called it chit-chat.
Gossip.
Exactly. He criticized historians for just blindly trusting tradition, for repeating what they heard without even checking if it was possible. They would list kings and battles, but they wouldn't explain why. They ignored what he called the nature of civilization.
Which brings us right to section 2, history as a science, or as he called it, umran.
Yes, umran. It's a tricky word. It translates to civilization or social organization or culture. What Ibn Khaldun realized was that to understand history, you have to first understand the rules of umran. You have to treat history like a science with its own laws, just like physics or chemistry.
So if you understand the laws of how society works, you can basically fact-check the history books.
That's it precisely. You can spot the lies.
Can you give us an example of a lie he spotted using this method?
Oh, he loves to debunk exaggerated numbers. His favorite target is the story of the Israelites in the desert with Moses. He talks about how some historians claim they had an army of 600,000 men.
Okay, that's a lot of guys.
It's a huge number. And Ibn Khaldun just looks at that figure and says, impossible.
Why impossible?
Logistics. He applies his science of Umran. He says, look at the geography. Look at the resources available in the Sinai Desert. You cannot feed 600,000 soldiers, plus their families, plus all their livestock in that environment.
There's no supply chain.
There's no supply chain. He also does a demographic analysis, arguing that not enough generations had passed since Jacob to even produce that many fighting men. He's using economics and demography to critique an accepted tradition.
That is incredibly modern. He's doing source criticism based on material reality.
Exactly. He always starts with the material reality.
Yeah.
And for him, the most basic material reality is geography.
He starts with the ground, literally the dirt under their feet.
He was a materialist in that sense. He argues that you cannot understand a people without understanding where they live. He divides the known world into 7 zones. This was standard Greek geography he was borrowing, but he applied it sociologically.
Right. He talks about the temperate zones versus the extreme zones.
Correct. He argues that the physical environment shapes human character. The 4th zone, the temperate zone where the Mediterranean is, produces moderate people, balanced characters. But if you go to the extreme north, the cold makes people reckless or stupid in his view. If you go to the extreme south, the heat makes people passionate but flighty.
It sounds a little deterministic to our ears, climate is destiny. But for the 14th century, this is a radical attempt to connect biology and society.
It connects man to the earth. And he has this fascinating theory about heat and joy. He asks, why are the people of the Sudan so happy and prone to dancing?
Dancing, that's what he's analyzing.
Yes. He asks why people in the South seem so happy. And his scientific explanation is that the heat causes the animal spirit in the heart to expand and spread through the body. And this expansion, this physical process, creates the feeling of joy.
Okay, so that's some pseudoscience gold right there.
It is, but notice the method. He isn't saying they are happy because of their gods or because of their culture. He's trying to find a physical cause for a social phenomenon. He's saying they are happy because of the physics of heat on the biology of the heart. That is the revolutionary step.
Even if his physics was totally wrong, his method was pointed in the right direction.
Exactly. And he applies this same rigor to the Bedouins. He talks about their diet.
Their diet. How does that fit in?
Well, he argues that the abundance of food in the cities creates coarse humors in the body, which dulls the mind and corrupts the body. But the Bedouins, who eat these meager diets, milk, dates, little grain, they have sharper minds and healthier bodies. He actually thought city dwellers were physically stupider because they ate too much rich food.
So the Muqaddimah is also a diet book, the Bedouin cleanse.
In a way. But it all fits his central theme. Luxury is poison. It poisons the economy, it poisons the social solidarity, and it literally poisons your body. For him, the city is a place of decay in every possible sense.
All right, let's get to the core of this then. We have the hardware, the geography, the climate. Now we need the software, the engine that makes this whole thing run. This is the big one. Section 3. The core engine, Asabiyyah.
Asabiyyah. This is the absolute heart of Ibn Khaldun's thought. It's often translated as group feeling, social solidarity, or esprit de corps.
And the root word comes from something like nerve or ligament, right? Or from blood relatives.
Yeah, the root asaba refers to your agnates, your male blood relatives on your father's side, the people who surround you and defend you. So originally, it means standing up for your own kin. But Ibn Khaldun stands it. It becomes the glue that binds any group together. It's their collective will. It's what allows a group to protect itself and, crucially, to press its claims against other groups.
And he draws this incredibly sharp line between the desert and the city, between what he calls Badawa and Hadara.
This is the fundamental dialectic of his history. You have Badawa, which is Bedouin life, rural life, desert life. And you have Hadara, which is sedentary urban life. Ibn Khaldun argues that Asabiyyah is by far strongest in the desert.
Okay, why? Why there?
Because survival absolutely depends on it. In the desert, there's no police force. There are no city walls to protect you. You are completely reliant on your kin, on your tribe. If you don't stick together, you die. It's that simple. And this brutal reality forges a group that is tough, brave, and incredibly cohesive.
It's interesting he calls them savage, but he also seems to admire them.
He does. He says they are closer to goodness and bravery than city people.
Oh.
Good in the sense of being unspoiled. They're honest. They're courageous because they have to be. They haven't been corrupted by luxury or softened by living under a government that does everything for them.
And the ultimate goal of these tough, good Bedouins is to stop being Bedouins.
Exactly. The goal of Badawa is to achieve Hadara. The Bedouins, driven by this intense Asabiyyah, have the power to conquer. They look at the city. It's wealthy, it's soft, it's luxurious, and they want it. Their group feeling makes them militarily and morally superior to the city dwellers who have lost their edge. So the tribe comes storming out of the desert, conquers the city, and establishes a new dynasty.
They win the prize. But the prize is a trap.
It is the ultimate trap, and this leads us directly to Section 4, the life cycle of dynasties. Ibn Khaldun treats the dynasty, the state, as a living organism. It's born, it grows up, it gets old, and it dies. And he puts a very specific timeline on it.
The 3 generations.
Roughly 120 years. He says 4 generations at the absolute most, but usually you could see 3 very distinct phases of psychology.
Okay, let's walk through them. Generation 1, the builders.
These are the conquerors. They have just come out of the desert. They're tough. They're used to hardship. They share power and wealth with their tribe. Their asabi is at its absolute peak. The ruler is still just one of the guys, maybe the first among equals.
Right.
He relies on his tribe for his power, and the tribe relies on him. Taxes are low, justice is rough, but it's generally seen as fair.
Okay. Then comes generation 2, the maintainers.
Now we're in the city. The ruler is the son of the conqueror. He grew up seeing the struggle, so he remembers it. But he didn't live that desert life himself. He lives in a palace. He starts to separate himself from the tribe. He wants absolute power, not shared power.
So he starts to push his own people away.
He does. Maybe he hires a few professional administrators or mercenaries.
Hmm.
The Asabiyyah starts to crack. That group feeling is fading because they don't need each other for immediate survival anymore. They've got walls and laws now.
And then the inevitable slide, Generation 3, the destroyers. Or as the outline puts it, the senility phase.
The senility of the state. This generation is born entirely into luxury. They have never known hunger. They have never slept on the ground. They have completely, totally lost that desert toughness. In fact, Ibn Khaldun says they become like women and children in their dependence on others, which is a very 14th century way of putting it. But his point is they're helpless.
They can't fight their own battles anymore.
No, they rely entirely on paid mercenaries. And because they've alienated their own tribe, the source of their Asabiyyah, they have no organic support base. The ruler is just a head without a body. And at this point, the dynasty is just ripe for the plucking.
By a new group from the desert with strong Asabiyyah.
Exactly. A new hungry group looks at this senile, corrupt, wealthy dynasty and just sweeps it away. And the whole cycle starts all over again.
It's the classic shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, but applied to entire empires.
It is. And what's so powerful about it is that Ibn Khaldun doesn't see this as some tragedy that can be avoided. He sees it as a natural law. You cannot have civilization without the city, but the city inevitably destroys the Asabiyyah that made it possible in the first place.
So let's talk about how the city destroys it, because it's not just about getting soft and lazy, it's about money. Which brings us to Section 5, the economics of the fall.
This is where Ibn Khaldun sounds shockingly like a modern supply-side economist. He has a very sophisticated theory of taxation and its relationship to the lifespan of the dynasty.
He basically drew the Laffer curve 600 years before Arthur Laffer ever did.
He absolutely did. His argument is simple. At the beginning of a dynasty, the rulers are desert folk. They're simple, they don't need much money, they're pious and modest, so taxes are low.
Okay.
Because taxes are low, people get to keep most of what they earn. This creates a huge incentive to work, to farm, to trade, to innovate. So the economy booms and the tax base grows. Low rates on a big economy means high revenue. The treasury is full.
Everyone is happy. But then comes the luxury.
The Bedouin habits wear off.
Mm-hmm.
The generation 2 and 3 rulers, they want silk, they want palaces, they want exotic foods. And more importantly, they need to pay those mercenaries because their own tribe won't fight for free anymore. So their expenses just skyrocket.
So they have to raise taxes.
They raise taxes, they invent new customs duties, they squeeze the subjects for every last coin. But here's the rub. As the tax rates go up, the incentive to work goes down.
Right. Why bother?
Exactly. Why work so hard if the Sultan's just going to take half of your harvest? So production drops. The economy shrinks. The tax base withers away.
So the Sultan ends up with less money, even though the tax rate is much higher.
Precisely. And this creates a death spiral. The Sultan is desperate for cash. He can't lower his expenses because his power now depends on this display of luxury and on paying those mercenaries. So he starts doing something even worse than just high taxes. He starts engaging in what Ibn Khaldun calls injustice.
Confiscating property.
Confiscating property. And, Ibn Khaldun notes, the ruler enters the market as a competitor. The Sultan starts his own farms or trading businesses and uses his political power to rig the market, forcing merchants to buy his goods at high prices or selling their goods for him. This completely ruins the merchant class.
And when the merchant class is ruined, the whole city is ruined.
Yes, and Ibn Khaldun has this beautiful philosophical point here. He says, the dynasty constitutes the form of the world. The subjects and wealth constitute the matter. It's very Aristotelian. You can't have form without matter. If the dynasty, the form becomes corrupt and extractive, it destroys its own matter, the wealth and the city. And when the matter is gone, the form has nothing left to hold it up. It just collapses.
So it's a total systems failure. Moral failure leads to political failure, which is driven by economic failure. It's all connected.
It connects everything. The loss of Asabiyyah leads to the reliance on mercenaries. The mercenaries require money. The need for money leads to high taxes and injustice. High taxes destroy the economy, and a destroyed economy leaves the state defenseless. Collapse.
It's just so logical. It makes you look at history, even modern history, in a completely different way. But we have to address one other element here. Ibn Khaldun was a religious scholar, a judge, a guardian of religion. Where does God fit into this mechanical, almost secular-sounding machine? That's Section 6.
This is a really nuanced and interesting part of his thought. Ibn Khaldun was a devout Muslim. He believed in prophecy. He believed in the supernatural. He even had these sections on magic and sorcery in the Muqaddimah, which he treats as real phenomena.
Ugh, there's a but coming.
But he argues that in the ordinary course of history, God doesn't constantly intervene to break the laws of sociology. The laws of climate, economics, and Asabiyyah are the standard operating procedure of God's creation. They are the system he put in place.
So miracles are the exception, not the rule.
Exactly. However, he does make one massive exception for religion as a social force. Remember Asabiyyah, that group feeling.
The glue.
Religion is like superglue. Ibn Khaldun argues that the Arabs, specifically, are a very difficult people to unite because they're so fiercely independent and tribal. He says the only thing powerful enough to override their petty rivalries and unite them into a massive force is a religious calling.
So religion supercharges Asabiyyah.
It absolutely supercharges it. When you add religious zeal to that raw tribal solidarity, you get a force that can conquer much faster and much further than would normally be possible. He uses the initial spread of Islam as his prime example. It allowed the Arabs to punch way, way above their weight class.
Okay, so religion is like a performance-enhancing drug for a society's group feeling.
That's a great way to put it. But even then, he notes that prophecy itself needs Asabiyyah to succeed. A prophet without a strong tribe to defend him and his message cannot succeed in this world. So even the divine mission is bound by the laws of sociology.
That is such a pragmatic, almost hard-nosed take on religion's role in the world.
It is. It's what makes him feel so modern.
Yeah.
He doesn't just throw up his hands and say God willed it. He tries to explain the mechanism through which God's will is executed in human society.
So we've gone from the plague-ridden ruins of Tunis to this grand theory of history. We've seen the Bedouins storm the city, get rich, get lazy, and then get conquered. We've seen the tax rates rise and fall.
We've dissected the anatomy of civilization. And, his own life had this climax that feels like it belongs in a movie, where the theorist met the ultimate historical force.
You're talking about his meeting with Tamerlane.
Ah, yes. The moment where the theorist meets the monster.
Set the scene for us.
It's 1401. Ibn Khaldun is an old man now. He's in Damascus serving as a judge and camped outside the walls. The army of Timurra, the lame Tamerlane.
The guy who built pyramids out of human skulls, the scourge of God.
The very same. Tamerlane is the ultimate embodiment of Badawa. He's the nomadic conqueror par excellence. His Asabiyyah is off the charts, and he is just smashed through the sedentary Islamic world like a wrecking ball, and now he's at the gates of Damascus.
And Ibn Khaldun is stuck inside.
Most people are terrified. Mahmud Sultan has actually fled, but Ibn Khaldun, he decides he needs to meet this guy. So he gets his companions to lower him over the city walls of Damascus in a basket.
In a basket, seriously.
In a basket.
Yeah.
To go and negotiate with Tamerlane. And they sit down in Tamerlane's tent and they talk for days through a translator.
What on earth do you talk about with Tamerlane?
History and geography. Tamerlane asks him all about the geography of North Africa. He's gathering intelligence for future conquests. And Ibn Khaldun, ever the survivor, he charms him. He actually writes a short history of the Maghreb for Tamerlane right there in the camp.
He's basically performing his theory for the warlord who is about to sack the city he's in.
Precisely. And think about the symbolism. Ibn Khaldun had spent his life writing about how the savage nomads with strong Asabiyyah conquer the soft city dwellers. And here he was, the ultimate city intellectual, sitting in the tent of the ultimate nomad conqueror, watching his theory play out in brutal real time.
That is just chilling. It really drives home that point about his life. He was never just an observer.
And Tamerlane respected him. He let him go. Ibn Khaldun was allowed to return to Egypt, where he eventually died a few years later. He survived the plague, the prisons, the political intrigue, and Tamerlane.
A survivor to the end. But the civilization he was analyzing wasn't, and that's the melancholy that just hangs over the whole book.
It really is. He was writing an autopsy. He knew his world was in its time of senility, as he called it. He wasn't writing a blueprint for how to save it. He was writing explanation for why it was dying.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway? Why does a 14th century Tunisian magistrate still matter to us today?
He matters because he gave us a framework to analyze systems. Before him, history was mostly just a sequence of events. He gave us the tools to ask why. He showed us that politics, economics, and social values are all interconnected. You can't isolate them. And he showed us that success often contains the seeds of its own destruction. The very thing that makes a group great, the move to the city, the civilization, the wealth, is the very thing that inevitably kills it.
It's a bit of a tragic view of history, isn't it?
It's deeply tragic. He was, at heart, a pessimist. He saw that everything that rises must eventually fall.
And that leads to our final provocative thought for you to take with you. Ibn Khaldun suggests that sedentary culture, the city, the art, the science, the very deep dive you're listening to right now, is the goal of civilization. It's what we all strive for. But he also says it is the end of civilization. It's the terminal phase.
Now the question is, if urbanization and luxury inevitably lead to the loss of Asabiyyah, to the loss of that solidarity and toughness and eventual ruin, is it possible for a civilization to break the cycle? Can we have the city without the senility? Or are we all like the dynasties of 14th century North Africa, just waiting for a new hungry group from some new desert to come and restart the clock?